Good afternoon. My name is Michael Kane, and it's April 14th, meeting of the Solar Task Force. Welcome, everyone. Today, before we begin, I guess we should first take roll and then approve the minutes. So with that, Mr. Jeffrey Shaw.
Present.
Mr. Mike Thompson, sorry. Ms. Bonnie Kaumberger.
Present.
Trying, yep. And please note, Brian Thomas Sr. is not here today, so we do have a quorum, so we can proceed. With that, I'd ask each of you to look at the minutes from last meeting. And take 1 second to look them over. They looked okay from my point of view. I'd like to move to approve the minutes for March 10th meeting.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So that's the minutes we have. Today, we will continue with really our discussion of principally utility scale solar, and we still have, I think, some very important matters to discuss today. We also have planned Susan Minnemeyer from the Chesapeake Conservancy agreed to be here to present in person. We actually have her presentation available. I think she's running late today, so instead of inviting her to begin, we will begin our business looking at the recommendations that have been provided as they are up to date. And with that, I will ask Les Knapp to join us. He's joining us, of course, as usual, via this time Zoom. So welcome, Les.
Hello.
And I know we also have at the end of the meeting, Les, maybe some updates from Annapolis that are germane to what we are doing here. So if Susan gets here, Les, we will invite Susan to present, and we'll conclude the section of business we're working on in the recommendations, and then pause it, allow her to present, and then give it back to you, okay?
Okay.
All right. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Les.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Look forward to probably being there in person for next month's meeting. We're covering the recommendations, and I think we're in the home stretch. Hopefully you have the recommendations document with you. It's version 6, dated for today. And this summarizes everything we've adopted in general, residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, and community and utility scale. So the first recommendation that we have is under community solar, and that was recommendation 11, which was tabled at the last meeting. This is concurrent with recommendation 12 under utility scale. They were kind of tabled simultaneously to develop language. And in specific, I was asked to get a little more information about pilot programs prior to considering the adoption of this language. I have done a little bit of research, and I can talk very briefly about pilots for a few minutes, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please, Les.
Okay, so pilot programs, or payment in lieu of taxes, were developed originally in Boston. They've been using it since about 1925. I believe they're the oldest one that uses it in the nation. But a lot of different states and local governments, including in Maryland, uses pilots for a wide variety of issues. And basically, what it is exactly what it sounds. It's a payment in lieu of taxes. Specifically in Maryland, either real property taxes, which is more applied at the state level, or specifically used by local governments a lot, payment in lieu of personal property taxes. And this is, of course, very beneficial for certain businesses or classes of activities. And in Maryland, there's a broad way you can apply pilots. Local governments have a lot of flexibility here. Some of them are long-term formal contracts that stipulate annual payments for a specific duration. Other of them are just more routine annual payments where a local government might send an annual letter to a nonprofit or something requesting a pilot. Some of them are voluntary property tax payment where a nonprofit or a other entity would elect to make properties that are otherwise tax exempt under state law subject to property taxes. And sometimes they can be irregular one-time payments. So you pay one fee up front, and for that activity, you're done. So all of these types are used in Maryland to various extents. And these are set in state law. Basically, there's several hundred at least pilots at the local government level. Many of them are centered in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County, but you have others. St. Mary's has at least 3 that I could get the number, but I don't have specific information on what they are. And just to kind of highlight a little bit of what is allowed out there. For example, Anne Arundel County has pilots for economic development projects. Washington County has for technology-related businesses. Statewide, the state has authorized, and this is germane to the task force, facilities for electricity generation. And that can be certainly for utility-scale solar or even smaller solar projects for the equipment. You can do Allegheny County has it for a variety of issues. The Hippodrome Performing Arts Center in Baltimore City, warehousers, imported stock for importers, senior citizen housing, low-income housing, and affordable housing land trust. These are all examples of pilots that can be done in Maryland authorized through code. And most of the law for the local governments is found in the real property tax article, subtitle 7, subtitle 5.
So I think, if I may, Les, suggest that, first, I think you've mentioned some of the pilot programs that were directly related to energy, and so I think perhaps in the final draft of this document that we have in an appendix the possibility of some examples that may be of interest to the commissioners. So I would suggest that perhaps we consider that. We tabled this, so I just want to see if any of the other task force members have any questions or concerns about this.
I would like to see more details on it before we would progress it forward.
Yeah. Just so I understand, Les, there's no fiscal implication of this. This would be something that we are highlighting to the commissioners that they consider this, and therefore, right, we're not obviously suggesting that they have to do this. This is just a suggestion.
Correct. The language is specifically, they should consider fiscal or policy incentives. They are absolutely under no mandate or requirement to adopt anything. The recommendation is you should consider these types of incentives. And one potential incentive is a pilot program. They certainly do not have to adopt that. Again, it's simply made for your consideration.
And just one additional follow-up question, perhaps related to what Mike has suggested and Bonnie has indicated. There are pilot programs. Are there any that are connected to solar in the state that you know of?
Yes, Caroline County, I believe, has done several pilots. They've negotiated. State law is already set up that if you want to do a pilot, you basically can. It's up to the jurisdiction. I would have to double check to see, as a commission form of government, if St. Mary's would have to have a enabling law put in place. That law is there in statute broadly. It might need a county-specific piece in statute. I would have to double check that.
And to speak on that subject, the utility scale solar project that had been proposed in St. Mary's County had discussions about taking advantage of a pilot program. So, I mean, it was potentially going to happen with that project.
And so St. Mary's County can indeed implement such programs.
Well, I mean, if there's any nuances that need to be resolved, the county attorney's office would handle that. But the county attorney's office was aware of the possibility that that project wanted to take advantage of pilot.
Any other comments from the task force members?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so the pilot program would be an upfront payment in lieu of annual taxes on the capital investment that the entity is making? Is that?
Potentially. I mean, I would say at a minimum that it's at the county's discretion to enter into a pilot payment in lieu of taxes on any of a variety of projects. And so they have to consider just how much they're giving away and how much they're gaining and what the fiscal impact is.
So it would be used as an incentive?
Well, that's the whole point, right. And so people who are looking for incentives, you know, I have this much investment, as Les said, it is sometimes with a affordable housing project. He mentioned a fine arts center. So here I have a project. I think it'll benefit the community. Will the community benefit my fiscal plan by granting me a pilot?
And this also, the number 11 suggests that these are projects that are located exclusively on brownfield, grayfield, or infield developments, as well as potentially benefit low-income communities or economically disadvantaged communities. So, I mean, from my point of view, I think I don't have any concerns about this language, but I would, for it to be meaningful, I think I would like to see less put into the document, an example of it, so that the commissioners can in some ways see how this could work here in St. Mary's County.
And if I may comment,
Please.
At this point, we haven't seen very many people taking advantage of the brownfield, grayfield, and so forth. So maybe it will require some incentive in order to take advantage of those situations that are already have the environmental issues before them. You know,
Could very well be.
Right.
Could very well be. Bonnie, do you have any comments here?
Honestly, with community solar, with any solar at this point in time, I think that a pilot program should be available to any group that wants to put in community solar, regardless of where they're locating it or who it's for. The environmental benefits of solar they benefit the community regardless. So.
Well, I guess so. If it is community solar, Les, that's a good point that Bonnie's raising, because if it is community solar, this is a question maybe for some of the two technical experts here that you and I know Mr. Shaw also knows about this. Jeff knows about this. They require sort of to meet the need, community solar does have a percentage of economically disadvantaged households that have to benefit from this. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
If they are going into one of the 3 buckets that are approved underneath the community solar legislation, that one of the 3 buckets, if they want to call themselves an LMI project, then yes. The percentage number escapes me, but there is a certain percentage of subscribers that need to be in the LMI category to be in that bucket.
And the other 2 buckets, it's not required. So to Bonnie's point, right, this would be a narrower interpretation as we're putting it right here.
That's correct. And one of the other buckets is brownfield LMI.
So I think,
I'm sorry, just brownfields, not the LMI, so.
yeah, I think to your point, I have no objections to that broader interpretation. So I think that's potentially a friendly amendment here, especially with community solar. So Les, could we then strike, right, the 1 and 2, and that they should be, that the county should consider fiscal or policy incentives for community solar projects, period? One potential incentive could be the creation of a payment in lieu of taxes program.
I would recommend one small amendment to that, just say the county should consider fiscal or policy incentives for community solar projects under the state statute that authorizes them, and unfortunately I don't have that right available with me. But I would just put that statutory reference at the end so you know exactly what you're talking about, and then have the rest as you said. Strike 1 and 2, make it apply to any community solar project under that statute.
I think that's a friendly amendment, and so, go ahead.
Sorry, isn't that the number 1, the definition of how we're defining community solar?
Yes.
That is
the
correct.
statute-
Yeah.
I see.
So I would just reference that statute again.
Okay. As defined by?
Yeah, it's in number 1, right? It is in number 1 already, Les?
Yes, you've adopted that because that's the state's definition, so using that just makes sense for avoiding any type of confusion.
Agreed, okay. So I would ask that you make those changes, and then when we come back next time, we can approve them. All right?
Okay, or you could approve that in concept if you're comfortable
Yeah,
and simply
I
review
am. So I move that we approve 11 as recommended, that the county should consider fiscal or policy incentives for community solar projects in some sense, let's say pursuant to the definition, right, of community solar indicated in the Maryland Code. And then the second, we will strike out those 1 and 2s there. And then one potential incentive could be the creation of a payment in lieu of taxes program. I move that be our recommendation.
I second.
Discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes, so we'll look to that language. I think you have it, Les. Les, we also we'll pause here before we get to utility scale solar, because as we mentioned, we have a guest speaker, Susan Minnemeyer, as Vice President at Chesapeake Conservancy. For those of you who you recall, they've produced a report for St. Mary's on optimal solar siting in St. Mary's County. Our group has worked with land use folks, right, Harry, in St. Mary's, and have been working with them a bit to help them develop this report. and we're pleased that she's here with us. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Susan, and welcome you on behalf of the Solar Task Force, and thank you for your presentation here today and making the journey to beautiful St. Mary's County.
Do I need to, okay, now I can tell them.
There you have it.
Great. So, yeah, thank you for having me participate today and for funding us to do this project. So we're really pleased to be able to apply our GIS expertise to determining what opportunities exist for optimal solar siting. So, and Harry, in terms, or sorry, whoever is driving the presentation?
Yeah, I've got it, so just say next slide. Yep.
Great, okay. I'm also representing Emily Wiggins and Emily Mills, who led the GIS analysis for the team. So I worked on helping to develop the methodology and another project that we conducted in Baltimore City and County, but want to reflect them as well. We also put out a press release this afternoon, just coinciding with this afternoon. So we're going to be doing some outreach regarding the release of the report, and it's available on the Chesapeake Conservancy website starting this afternoon. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. The principles that we conducted the study with are that solar energy development is critical to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This is not an effort to slow down solar development. In fact, we believe that careful siting of where solar is developed can maximize solar benefits and reduce adverse impacts. It's also important, I heard this come up earlier today, that to consider equity so that solar energy benefits are available to all, and that all individuals are able to especially access the cost savings that can come with solar energy, and that policies and incentives are likely to be required to guide solar to preferred locations. Next slide. So Maryland's renewable portfolio standard goals, I'm sure you know, requires 50% of electricity to be generated from renewable sources by 2030. Although St. Mary's County, being a part of the SMECO territory, has a carve-out target of 2.5%. They were excluded from the 14.5% carve-out, but potentially land in St. Mary's County would be eligible towards reaching the state goal. So we still use the 14.5% carve-out in terms of considering what a reasonable goal for St. Mary's County would be, just thinking that it still would be possible that solar developed in St. Mary's could support the statewide energy goal and go beyond the 2.5% requirement.
So, one question of clarification. 50% of the energy generated, it's my understanding about half of the electrical energy is generated outside of Maryland that we use in Maryland. So is it 50% of what we use or 50% of what we generate?
Yeah, I'm more familiar particularly with the solar carve-out, because the solar carve-out says solar energy produced in Maryland, whereas I believe the renewable energy, caveat that that's not my expertise, but that it could include wind power, renewable hydropower, or sources that are outside of Maryland. But the solar carve-out goal specifically says produced in Maryland.
So that's the 6, I think we have 6 power plants in Maryland that burn fossil fuels.
My point of clarification, it's 50% of what we use.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Regardless of source.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the solar carve-out is Maryland.
Okay.
So the statewide goal is to produce about 9,000 gigawatt hours of electricity from solar by 2030. This is based on projections of future energy use. Also, the statewide governor's task force on renewable energy siting estimated, sorry, this is actually a correction, I believe it's 7,500 to 33,000. I believe this number is actually from the draft. The updated number is in the press release. So they have a pretty wide estimate of the amount of land that would be required, and that's based on an assumption about where the solar will come from, how much will come from utility scale solar. Next slide. So in terms of coming up with what a goal would be for St. Mary's County, we looked at different ways of doing this. And like I said, this is assuming some portion of the statewide goal. And our goal with this for the study was to identify enough optimal sites to be able to reach this goal, or to examine whether enough sufficient sites exist in the county. So we looked at electricity consumption in St. Mary's County as a portion of the state as a whole, also at land area and population. And based on these, the largest goal would be the one from land area, because St. Mary's has a lower than average population density, and that provides a goal of about 331 gigawatt hours per year. So that's out of the 9,000 gigawatt hours per year goal for the state as a whole. And just to compare to the study we did for Baltimore City and County, we looked at their electricity generation, or their consumption, apologies, and their energy consumption or electricity consumption in that region was 18% of the goal. So they had a much higher, about 2,000 gigawatt hour goal that we set for that region. So for a lower population density area, we came up with a lower average goal of the 331 gigawatt hours. Next slide.
And may I just to be sure I understand these numbers, these are estimates that you have developed out of this. These are not anything statutory that is provided by the state, but if someone wanted to know, what should St. Mary's be aiming at in terms of total amount of solar production to support the state goals? These could be potentially used as guidelines for St. Mary's. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I would also say that, you know, there's some other reasonable assumptions that you could make. One might be that a more rural county might have more requests to use land for solar than an urbanized area because of differences in land prices, certainly with comparison to either the DC or Baltimore metropolitan areas. But, you know, counties on the Eastern Shore might, you know, are likely to experience that even more so than St. Mary's County.
Thank you.
Great. The study is aimed at avoiding land use trade-offs. So the concern with land use is that ground-mounted solar could compete with desirable land uses for food production or for environmental services, and that conversion of prime farmland for solar energy development should be avoided because it can remove the best land from food production. Another concern with solar is around the loss of forest or ecologically sensitive lands. And the example I think most people are familiar with was the project for Georgetown University to develop a solar site in Charles County, where the permit was ultimately denied by the state because of concerns that it would clear forest and forested wetlands on the property that was identified. So it's also counterintuitive to the goals of mitigating climate change to clear forest for solar energy where possible. So there's also the opportunity to reclaim degraded lands. So you can take lands that have no other economic use at the current time, repurpose them for solar energy development, and it's a win-win for everyone. And these usually are capped landfills, contaminated lands. We also put properties like sites adjacent to wastewater treatment plants as a way to offset county energy use, and other abandoned sites or underutilized industrial sites. And also, I will comment on this, that in comparison to the previous study we did with Baltimore City and County, St. Mary's, of course, has a lot fewer of these contaminated industrial sites compared to that region, but we still looked for whatever sites might be available, certainly landfill sites and other potential areas for development. Sometimes, too, there are cases where a development might be stalled, like land cleared and the funding falls through, so you have a case of land that's already been cleared and then the project abandoned. Those sites can be taken advantage of in terms of making use of forest that is already cleared versus a new clearing. Next slide. So meanwhile, in the built environment, solar is very compatible with residential or commercial building uses, adds value to properties, reduces energy costs. Solar parking canopies also provide benefits like shaded parking, urban heat island reduction, opportunities to charge electrical vehicles. And we're starting to see those both in some commercial sites. So IKEA in particular uses both rooftop solar and solar parking canopies. There's also university sites. So Anne Arundel Community College is one of the sites near where we're based in Annapolis that has solar parking canopies. Next slide. So the optimal sites, just reviewing, degraded lands are landfills, wastewater treatment plants, brownfields, underutilized industrial sites. For parking canopies, we looked at parking lots at least an acre in size. And then rooftop, we looked at all sectors of rooftops and looked in particular at the categories listed and public properties. So, and then below the optimal sites, the second tier are preferred ground-mounted sites. So we looked at opportunities for ground-mounted, either community solar or utility scale solar that would avoid these environmental trade-offs to the degree possible. So in carrying out this project, we first were collecting baseline data. I want to thank the St. Mary's County staff for helping us. We worked with Eric Benson with the GIS department to provide us all types of county data on parcels, buildings, schools, transmission lines, and then we pulled in publicly available environmental data, prime soils, high-resolution land cover data that we produce, the Chesapeake Conservancy, protected lands data, and other degraded lands data sets. We then went through a scripted analysis to score all these parcels. So first, identifying all potential no-go areas, so protected areas, lands within the critical area, different types of easements or historic easements, historic zones, and mapped those out, and then looked at various environmental equity and efficiency criteria. And on that, we were looking mainly at land cover, equity data layers like the IRS opportunity zones. It's an opportunity for tax breaks from development in certain areas. There's just one that's in St. Mary's County. And in terms of efficiency, we were also looking at larger properties that could support bigger developments, as well as just the aggregate of rooftops and other smaller opportunities. Yes, that's fine. So screening data, these are the no-go sites that I just went through. As you can see, it's a significant amount of land in the county that are in no-go areas. And then wanted to draw attention to the peach area in the middle. Those are targeted ecological areas. So these are not legally prescribed from development, but they are identified by the state as priority conservation areas for future conservation. So for the purposes of this study, we recommend avoiding development of those lands, so we considered them as no-go areas in the study. We also avoided some commercial no-go zones where ground-mounted development wouldn't be possible.
Could I interrupt you just a second?
Yes,
Excuse
sure.
me. Harry, is there anything in, on those peach or colored ones that, the targeted ecological areas, they, in the zoning, they don't have any particular, they have different zoning, they're zoned differently in St. Mary's County, is that correct?
In that peach, you would find a variety of zones. Not as many zone varieties as you would find on the eastern side of the peach, where we see that there's a broad swath of uncolored land between the peach and the river. So, those areas are not colored peach, as Susan was saying, because of a specific zone in the zoning ordinance, but they are colored peach because of ecological reasons, which the zoning ordinance does have a lot of those ecological regulations that would be applied. To go back to a discussion at the past meeting that Ms. Kellenberger brought up, we do have a lot of regulations that would discourage or make difficult the development of lands for solar in place already. So this is trying to bring that together as a zone, if you will. So her table, for instance, shows the rural legacy is the hash marks.
Yes.
And we have that to the north and the south. And then we have the targeted ecological areas. And then we have the air installations down by Pax River, the local airport, which is a very narrow strip. If you can see that here. Yeah. And the preserved and protected lands that wind up being the green spots. Some of those are in the rural legacies, so these are probably primarily agricultural easements that have already been granted, which would already prevent the solar from being placed on them.
Okay.
Unless it's serving the farm that has the easement.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. It would be, so if it was residential, right, or it could be commercial under 2 megawatts.
So the quaint term no-go is mine. And they picked it up and put it in the report and in their presentation. Because the one thing I was emphasizing, to get back to Les Knapp's direction at the very beginning of the Solar Task Force, is if we're going to successfully challenge a PSC approval that we don't think should be approved, we need to be able to demonstrate that we have determined in advance that that is an area where the utility scale solar should not go, hence no go, versus where we would allow it to go because we have no logical reason to restrict it there. So that would be everything that is white on this map, everything that's uncolored.
I think the other thing, just for comparison, the Georgetown University site I mentioned earlier, that site was also in one of the Maryland targeted ecological lands, so I think you could consider those. Solar development wouldn't be prohibited in these areas, but you would be at a higher risk of opposition to the site on ecological grounds. And with the rural legacy areas, those are not currently in agricultural easements, but they've been identified as an agricultural preservation priority area. So again,
and it would be it would be contrary. Sorry to interrupt. It would be contrary to our comprehensive plan to allow the use of that land for utility scale solar. And so one last clarification before we leave this slide. So the last bullet at the bottom, it says commercial no-go. Again, I'll take responsibility for the use of the word commercial because I had not fully adopted the proper term, utility scale.
Yes.
That's what it, so yeah, we're not saying you can't go in commercially zoned areas. We're saying these are areas where utility scale should not go.
Right, thank you for that, that's correct. And so we've been really focused exclusively, at least at this stage, really on utility scale in terms of our concerns about restricting some development or very large utility developments. But in the other areas, as you point out, we still are permitting development on that are, commercial, industrial scales on property, right? That's owned by different commercial enterprises.
Yes, and my understanding is as well that, any rooftops, including, even in a protected area, the visitor center could still have solar on the roof. So that's not any existing buildings, generally, unless there's a historic designation that would prohibit it, can have rooftop solar by right.
Thank you.
Okay, next.
Great. Okay, so the next screening site we used was this data set that shows both prime farmland soils, which are in the dark brown color, and soils of statewide importance in tan. So the dark brown area are the best soils for agriculture, and the soils of statewide importance are a secondary category of favorable farmland. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I put some of the criteria we used. So one of the criteria into determining prime farmland is flat topography and well-drained soils. So as a result, St. Mary's County has a higher portion of the land base in these two categories of important agricultural soils than the typical county in Maryland. So we came up with criteria that would avoid sites that were exclusively prime soil but might include some prime soils as part of the parcel. So for the criteria for identifying these preferred ground-mounted sites, we were looking for tree canopy of less than 50%, and that is also assuming that the solar would go into the non-tree canopy portion of the site, but we avoided sites that were 90% tree canopy, even if there still was 5 acres not forested. We also looked for solar opportunity area, which we defined as low vegetation that was either, turf, grass, or cleared lands, not agriculture, and not forest. So these categories of land cover, we were looking for parcels that had at least 5 acres, so could at least support 1 megawatt of capacity for electricity generation. We looked for prime soil being less than 50% of the total parcel area, and soil of statewide importance less than 75% of the total area. So we didn't exclude development on these preferable agricultural soils, but we looked for opportunities where they were a minor portion of the overall available site, but didn't exclude lands for having a small portion with these more important soil categories. Next slide. Okay, so the results slide, and I wanted to mention the press release that we issued today. It also has a link to an interactive map viewer, so you can explore this data in detail, click on the different parcels, and learn more about them. The 2 brown shades are in the optimal site categories. They show the parking lots greater than 1 acre in size, and also degraded lands, landfills, and the water reclamation facility. And then the 2 purple shades are the preferred ground-mounted properties. The lighter color are those that are within a mile of electrical transmission lines, so those would be the more favorable sites or more economically favorable sites. And then the darker purple area are sites that are greater than a mile, so they would likely be less favorable for utility scale development. And then based on, so we have both the acres and the potential annual energy generation. For all of these optimal and preferred categories, a total of just over 5,100 gigawatt hours per year. Next slide. Some sample optimal locations that passed the screening study, and I will say, like, caveat, we did not go through individual sites to research viability, but instead, these are the ones that passed the GIS criteria, and then the county, could go in more detail about the feasibility of various sites. But the Clements Convenience Center, the St. Andrews landfill, the water reclamation facility that is pictured here, and then also county-owned lands and school. County-owned lands are not likely to be taking agricultural land out of development, and then schools, especially in rural areas, could either have rooftop solar or some area of ground-mounted solar. I've seen both types of development to offset school electricity use. Next slide. Okay, so county-owned properties are mapped here. These are in the map viewer as well. This is a screenshot from the map viewer showing so we considered county-owned lands as optimal sites because of the lack of trade-offs with land use in agriculture. And then we also measured the solar opportunity area. So we were looking at non-forested areas on county-owned properties. Next slide. Another chart showing the optimal sites. So the greatest amount of area were on the rooftop opportunities, with the next category being the publicly owned lands, solar opportunity area. There's a small portion in the degraded lands and landfill categories, but to the degree those are viable, those are win-win categories. And then there's a small area and parking lots over 1 acre. I'll just comment that this was completely flipped for the Baltimore study, with just massive amounts of impervious surface and parking lots in that region. So rooftop solar, we broke it down by residential. That's the biggest category. So the degree that there's a number of incentives for homeowners to pursue solar tax credits and other benefits, but there's a really large variation in the adoption of solar in different regions. For example, the District of Columbia, they can't do ground-mounted solar. They have some very strong incentives for rooftop solar, and have some of the highest levels of installed solar across the region, and even much more so than a city like Baltimore. So to the degree that the county might be able to assist residential homeowners with making solar more affordable, it can be a really positive benefit for residents. Commercial is a smaller portion of the overall, but often these projects are very large. And they also tend to be commercial properties where the business owns the building, like I've mentioned Target and IKEA putting solar on their own rooftops. It's less common in shopping centers where the stores are leased, but again, incentives could encourage this.
Can I just interrupt very quickly and ask for a point of clarification between this and the last slide?
Okay.
The last slide had total rooftop. Was that slide referring just to I'm sorry, these were just optimal sites, and the next one was preferred?
Yes. So if you look at the amount, this is basically taking the light blue area on the previous slide and breaking it down further into categories. Yeah.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so are optimal sites enough? Our goal with this was to see whether we could identify enough area in these optimal sites that if the county wanted to meet their renewable energy goals or a reasonable share of the statewide RPS goals, that they could be done with optimal sites. Of course, we recognize a lot of the individual sites aren't going to prove to be viable, but by also looking at the preferred ground-mounted sites, that could be 4%. So I think that that represents that these are a real opportunity for the county, and especially if you want to avoid development on prime farmland, that maximizing the amount that could go on these optimal or preferred ground-mounted sites, or whatever mix the county comes up with, these are a real opportunity that could minimize the amount of farmland that's lost to solar or forest or other ecologically sensitive lands. And then I think the next slide is our conclusions. So just to summarize, as much as the county can prioritize optimal sites, that's going to reduce the amount of potential conversion of farmland for solar energy development. And a second tier are these preferred ground-mounted sites that can identify more marginal agricultural lands as opportunities for solar energy development and avoid those the biggest trade-offs when it comes to land use. So, either, being able to provide incentives or policies that accelerate the ability to develop these lands or make it economically attractive, those are all approaches that can, reduce land use trade-offs in determining solar siting. So that, I believe that's everything. So glad to answer any other questions.
Sure, thank you. So I'll like to open it up to the task force members, and then when the task force members are finished, if Les or Harry Knight want to jump in and ask a question, I'll invite them as well. So with that, Jeff Shaw, do you want to begin?
I know when I read this report here versus the slides, you had a snapshot in here of transmission.
Okay.
But didn't have it in this piece here.
Yes, the transmission lines are in the web application, so you can, the web application is the best place to explore all the data in terms of overlaying different sites. I believe that all the GIS data we used in the analysis are included in the web app.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
I can confirm, Mr. Shaw, if you had a chance to look at the exhibits I prepared for possible discussion today, and one of my exhibits included the transmission lines, that was collected from the web app she's referring to.
Great, okay. I'm good.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only question I've got, the Superfund site in Hollywood, I assume you...
We, sorry, I apologize. We did look at that in the report. I'd have to actually look at the text of the report to determine why we decided. I believe it was related to the overall land use. I can bring that up here on the side
Got
and
some
address that in a
environmental
couple
issues
minutes.
too, Mike. I know the site well. It's got trees and it's got wetlands, and it's almost bifurcated across the back end of the property with those wetlands and trees. So you have two sections. You've got a nice section up front by the road, but then you've got to cross some stuff to get to the back end of the property.
Yeah, I believe, so there is a aerial imagery shot of that site that's in the report, and I believe it's also adjacent to some protected areas, which may also be another reason why it's less desirable, although there could be potential for the non-forested portion of the site, but I believe it's also likely in the critical area, although I'm not sure. It has water on the site, so maybe not in the critical area,
not
but
critical
adjacent
area.
to the waterways. Okay.
Right. So the criteria didn't, caused it to fall off the map, but your interest in it, and I have interest in it, could certainly put it into, let me put it this way. We could eliminate it from the so-called no-go zone and have it be part of the, yes, you could put utility scale here. That's the next meat and potatoes this board needs to try to see how much detail you want to recommend in your final report.
Mike, any additional questions? Bonnie?
No, I look forward to checking out the GIS.
Yeah.
Nerd out.
So if you may, Chairman, before Les goes, because I'll just be brief.
Yep.
So should we get to my presentation later, I took this map and called this the protected. So just in concept, imagine this much land is declared protected, no utility scale in this area, just for the starting discussion, as opposed to, see, I was when we started on the siting study, I anticipated a larger preferred area. So my focus was on, we won't really declare you can't go there, we'll declare you should go here. Well, I like to call this map the fly speck map. The preferred areas, in my opinion, became minuscule on this map, and that's not enough. And it might be enough, well, I won't say it might be, it is enough per the study to satisfy St. Mary's County's carve-out well beyond the 2.5% required because we're in a co-op. But if we look at the our share as part of the overall state, 14.5%,
Right.
we can meet or exceed that goal, assuming all of this gets developed. But
Or
I
even-
envision the opportunity for St. Mary's County to be a solar exporter. If economic development thinks it's appropriate, if the county commissioners, if the community thinks it's appropriate, as Susan hinted in her presentation, why not develop more available open space if there's not a better agricultural product to be producing? Let it be solar. So that's why instead of saying we have a, anyway, that's why I thought the better starting point was, see, suddenly when you allow all this area that's in white, you've increased what I would now call my preferred area many, many, many fold.
So the fly spec map, if you
Yes.
want to switch to that, just
Yep.
wanted to clarify. So it's actually, so that combines both the optimal and preferred ground mounted. So just 4% of the fly spec map could reach the reasonable county share, the statewide goal, and going beyond 4%, still within the fly spec map, could be over and beyond. So the county potentially producing greater than its share of solar as like an economic development opportunity.
So actually, I do have a quick question. So the fly spec map.
There I go again.
I'm gonna call
Optimal and
it-
preferred ground-mounted map that we have up right here is a result of taking this, the first map, map 1, which is the protected no-go areas for commercial or community solar, and what?
And applying
Yeah.
these
correct.
standards here.
We
The
looked
prime farmland.
this and also the land cover data,
Yeah,
which I apologize that I didn't put our land cover data as a slide, but we were looking for low vegetation, so not already forested and not in current cropland.
And more than
that's
5
as
acres.
And more than 5 acres in
Right,
size.
right.
So all the small parcels dropped off, although all the small parcels are still counted in the rooftop area if they had if they're building.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is like low-hanging fruit, right? Here are all these places that are big enough for a 1 megawatt, not heavily forested, not good soils, and not currently in active agriculture.
Right.
So why not steer towards those? Because they're what other good are they doing us? Well, that's for the private property owner to decide, right? Because we don't own this land. So anyway, much to mull over. And now I think we should give Les his crack.
Les, do you have any questions for Susan?
No questions per se, just a compliment. Having gone through this and viewed a lot of these types of analyses, I find that the Conservancy's approach is really one of the best I've seen from a lot of these different types of reports I've reviewed.
Great, thank you, we appreciate that, but yeah, and the credit goes to Emily Mills and Emily Wiggins for their analysis.
A question I've got, or a comment, is that we're looking at current goals. We may find that they're inadequate at some point, that we need a lot more, when everybody gets their plug-in car and does this and does that, we may need a lot more than what we're talking about. And as you were saying, we may want to contribute a lot more than what we
Right.
use.
Yes, and I think also watching what incentives might be provided by the federal government and the states, and I think especially in the like rooftop commercial parking lot areas, because those are the installations that tend to be more expensive, but I believe there's a lot of incentives for the federal government to provide benefits to individual homeowners and also commercial entities, so in terms of tax benefits. So yes, there is a high likelihood that eventually we're talking about a 100% renewable energy goal, but when that might be, not determined for Maryland, but DC, for example, they have a 100% renewable energy goal. So I would expect it would increase. And so then, considering future considerations, would the criteria change, or would the amount of incentives to put more solar in the built environment change? Those are probably the main options, at least from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So just maybe a follow-up comment on what Mike has just mentioned. So in the final analysis, when you included both the optimal and preferred, this was, back of the envelope, well over 10 times more that you identified than what our share could be. So if that share increased or wanted to be increased by either the commissioners or, of course, the state at some level thought that there needed to be greater amounts built in St. Mary's, this analysis still suggests that there's plenty of room in both of those areas for additional solar development and utility, both across all the categories, but also in utility scale solar as well.
Yes, and an opportunity for the county for, I guess, walking the talk in terms of being really proactive in developing the county-owned properties. That is something we've seen in other counties as well. Like when they get a big federal grant to renovate schools, they include solar in those plans, or also potentially expanding on-farm solar, like solar that is a portion of the farm rather than replacing the farm, or looking at various opportunities like that would. That could expand solar outside of just utility scale solar. Otherwise, you're going to look at trying to expand the land area that's available and considering what that would entail.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that, like on the farms, I know more than one example of the farm barn being a primary target.
Yes,
for
often
solar.
a lot larger than the farmhouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know if you can speak to that, sorry, that the map that for the prime soils didn't make it into this packet. The prime soil, what year is that data from? How often is because that's USDA data, correct?
Yes, and I would have to follow up with that in writing. I don't know that off the top of my head, unless,
But would that be on the GIS?
Yeah, so I believe we pulled that from the Maryland IMAP layer. It's a statewide layer, but it's based on USDA data. It's hosted by Maryland, and I can clarify that following this meeting.
Awesome, thank you.
That's all. I don't have any additional questions. If no one else has additional questions, no? Okay, with that, Susan, thank you very much for joining us and for this report. And we look forward to, if we have any questions, please allow us to come back to you and reach out to you to clarify any questions. I know I have some technical questions as well that I might come back to you on and ask for additional clarification.
Yes, definitely feel free to do that. We're glad to answer any questions about that, so we'd be glad
Great.
to do that.
Great. Thank you very much. We very
Great.
much appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay, so with that, and maybe, Harry, it's appropriate for you to, would you like to present now or after we go through the utility scale, some of the recommendations that Les has been helping us develop?
I can do that in that it was intended to help facilitate some of those items that you're going to discuss with Les.
So if it's, you don't think it'll take too much time, we're under a tight deadline today
Right.
of now we have 55 minutes. So with that, I'll ask you to go over some of these important points with us. Yep.
Okay, so I have already discussed this with both the chair and with Les. So and when we left off last time, Bonnie had brought up a better understanding of the zones. And what zones should we allow utility scale in? So the Department of Land Use Growth Management recommends that it be a permitted use in all zones, just to simplify things. And much like we did with community. Now, if it's then also the task force heard me say that it should be a conditional use, as what Les offered us from other jurisdictions was sometimes called a special exception. I talked to our director. I knew the task force wanted to only have to go to one public meeting. So we've changed our recommendation. It should be a permitted use subject to site plan approval. Just to give you an idea of how that works, the initial site plan is submitted to and reviewed by the Technical Evaluation Committee, which includes the U.S. Navy. The concept plan subject to public hearing at the Planning Commission only for approval of the concept only. Then the detailed engineering is done as a major site plan re-reviewed by the Technical Evaluation Committee agencies for final approval by the planning director. If we went with my original suggestion of conditional use, you add a second hearing at the Board of Appeals. So I don't think that's a good idea.
So we'll actually review that recommendation in just a few minutes.
Right.
Thank you.
So the proposed buffer yards, I brought this exhibit along in case we need to fine tune this. I think I got it right, but it's open for discussion, obviously. And then I borrowed this from Les's, and this is how it would fit in the zoning ordinance, and I just have a suggestion to eliminate. The phrase he has proposed for your recommendation, I think, is appropriate for the recommendation because it explains the reason why you would want to go to understory instead of canopy. But I think when it comes to actually writing a regulation, rather than make the people justify it or have a plan reviewer judge it, we would just say you can automatically have understory substituted for canopy, no questions asked. Proposed solar, so that was community scale. It permitted permit approval only, no public meeting, no public hearing. Moving on to utility scale, that's the site plan I was describing earlier. This is just a suggestion, not allowed on land identified as protected areas on Map 1, Appendix A of the optimal solar siting. Trying to, begin a framework of how we're going to identify the allowed zones versus the disallowed zones when we don't want to tie it to typical land use zones. Here's the Type A buffer yard that the task force already approved. Again, I shortened the phrase just for regulatory purposes, and then the Type C buffer yard that the solar task force already approved. And And so here's showing the two proposed table of uses: solar community allowed in all zones, low intensity, also allowed in the in the accident potential zone, number 2 of the Patuxent River Naval Air Station. I'm not sure if they're going to think that's a good idea, but that's what I'm putting in the table for now. And allowing it in all flavors of the critical area. And again, that's community. Then we move to utility scale, keep it a low intensity use, allow it in all land use zones, only allow it in the intensely developed critical area, which is reflected on the map prepared by the Chesapeake Conservancy, and don't allow it in the accident potential zone of Patuxent River. I just went over these in case there are any questions of, so this is actually text borrowed from their report explaining the principles and the map. That's the map again. The principles for deciding what is the permitted zone and how they decided on the preferred sites. And then this winds up being maybe a simplified version. So if you imagine everything that's blacked out would be a potential proposed no-go zone, and everything that is in green is then the permitted use zone. So just to give you an idea of the differences in land mass. Here's the transmission lines. And that is that. So now we should let Les take over, because I can bring this back up should anyone have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Les? So we finished
Yeah.
11 in community, and now we're on utility scale solar.
Yes, last but not least. So number 1, the has already been adopted. Number 2 was also adopted, but there was a question that initial contact with the county should be identified at the last meeting. I have added additional language based on discussions with Mr. Knight, identifying St. Mary's County Department of Land Use and Growth Management. Since that was the task force's desire, I view this as a technical amendment, and unless the chair or members want to revisit this, I don't think you need to re-vote on this. Recommendation number 3, if the chair would permit, let's skip over that, since I think that will have the most discussion, and try to get through the others very quickly, and then leave the remainder of the time to discuss number 3. Recommendation number 4 deals with the application process. I tried to capture Mr. Knight's language here, and Harry, are you okay with how this goes?
On number 4, Harry?
Yes, sir.
He is. So again,
okay.
this was just an amendment that was suggested by the head of land use management.
Correct.
And this will allow us to review concept plans, site plans, et cetera. So there will be a public hearing, and that's what I understood, and I think all the Solar Task Force believe that should indeed happen. So this preserves that. I think that's a friendly amendment. So if anyone has any questions on that, they're welcome to raise them now. No, I think we're good on that, Harry. I'm sorry, Les, back to you. Sorry.
Okay, yes, that was adopted in concept, so that's good. At the previous meeting. Number 6, just revisiting based on Mr. Knight's comments earlier, just make sure, so you are okay with this, and when in terms of developing the statute, you would just for number 2 cut off the last part of where it would negatively affect the energy generation capacity of the project.
Would you repeat that again?
That takes us down. So for number 6, this language was adopted formally by the task force. I just want to make sure, reconfirming with Mr. Knight that he is okay with that last part under number 2.
Absolutely.
Dealing with the
I think it's a good
understory
recommendation for the task force. I'm just thinking ahead to when we actually start putting zoning regulations through review.
Understood. Okay.
Right. Okay. That takes us down to number 10, the military concerns. Now, last meeting, the task force adopted paragraph 1. We wordsmithed it, and you adopted paragraph 1 here of recommendation number 10. That ends with the SMART DG+. Subsequently, the chair has had communication with the military, and there was some discussion about whether a little more detail should be put in to the utility scale and potentially expanding this to community solar and industrial, commercial, institutional accessory use, not residential accessory use. And this is based on the Navy in particular's own process, is they're looking at a 2-mile zone around Naval Air Station, Patuxent River, and within certain facilities, which will be identified, to say that basically you have to consult with them because they may have concerns or want to preclude a project. So this additional language would need to be approved by the task force, and the chair can add in anything. This is, I think, based on concerns raised by the Navy.
Well, as you know, this is a sensitive issue for us in the county, and I did try to contact the base. I believe it was Sabrina Hecht who was the point of contact. She's not there. I was unable to reach anyone during the period of time prior to the meeting, so this doesn't reflect anything provided to me yet by the military. This really is, as you could see, a generic expression, right, in some ways, that reflected some of the language that was in the letter that they submitted to the task force, that's cited in a letter. But with that, I really, since this is an important issue, I'd like to open it up for discussion, especially, as we mentioned, Les's second paragraph. So with that, maybe I'll go again. Would you like to start, Mr.
Sure. The only thing I'd like further clarification on is the 2 miles. I'd like to know 2 miles from what, if they could state that.
I brought that letter. Would you like me to bring it up on screen?
Please.
Okay, so it's this second page. So yeah, here's the memo, Office of Undersecretary of Defense. It's from June of 2014. It's about glint and glare issues. And when we get to the second page, this paragraph down here, I had to go find it because I myself remembered the two, but what measured from. So solar renewable energy projects that are within 2 nautical miles of military airfield control towers, center of airfields, air traffic areas, or helicopter landing zones may require your consideration. And I believe Les has built this into to some degree into the recommendation here at the bottom of the page. And then it goes on to say, the military departments may wish to extend the analysis to the full extent of the land surface under the Class D airspace. I'm not sure what that is. And then the FAA's interim procedures associated with the subject are a reasonable guide to follow until better procedures for military operations are defined. While this memorandum does not extend to evaluation of concentrating solar renewable systems, careful consideration of glint glare from concentrating solar power towers within 10 nautical miles of the DoD flight operations is also suggested.
So I would suggest that we keep the language fairly vague. Of the Navy has a position, something along the lines of Patuxent River Naval Air Station, Webster Outlying Field may have concerns of solar projects that fall within whatever range we want to say. I wouldn't get into details on this. This could very well change And because the priority of solar at military installations is in flux, China Lake is covered in solar panels, Port Hueneme is covered in solar panels, Lakehurst has multiple megawatt generating solar on the property. So I think that that's something that I wouldn't want us to narrow in. I would just say that we want to take into account any Navy concerns at the time of the permitting process. The only other thing I do want to bring up real quick is that on our maps, we do not have that federal property eliminated. Neither Webster nor Pax River are blanked out. In fact, we actually are using, it looks like we have Pax River rooftop parking lot canopy opportunities integrated into the report. So just something we might want to consider rerunning that, since we have nothing to do or can have anything to do with
Okay.
federal, putting solar on federal property.
Right.
So that's just a suggestion for the maps.
Yes, and I looked at this, and I didn't look exclusively, but it looks like there's a buffer around the actual runways, but that wouldn't address the helicopter landing zones unless we actually have data on where those are. But that might make sense if you just say make the whole base from a county perspective a no-go, because it would be federal jurisdiction.
If a private company's trying to put land, we're not the
Right.
people that they want to go through to try and
Right,
put
exactly.
federal property. So I would run the federal property data, because Webster Outlying Field's the same issue. I think there's a few other parcels further south that are federally owned as well.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Bonnie.
The item I think might need to be addressed or whatever is as panels evolve, what I've seen a little bit of anyway is that they have less and less glare. And so we may get to the point where it's almost a flat black type
Yeah.
panel surface and no glare, no glint. Should that be kind of identified as some
As an alternative, I don't know.
some
what-
10% or 20% glare factor or something like that, or at least leave it open to
That could be
future
a-
development.
Yeah, I feel like that might be a question for maybe like solar energy industry folks who could be able to answer
Right, I understand.
what's possible.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I think we should keep it fairly vague, is because these
Right.
things are constantly changing, and,
So just so I understand, you would be in favor of, I mean, we don't really, we say here, right, security associated with farm-made installation, which they talked about, pilot glare issues could pose a risk to military operations within 2-mile zone around certain facilities, and it has the airfield control towers and the other things. And then I think the operative sort of sentence, utility scale solar developers should consult with the Navy prior to when developer applies for a certificate of public convenience and necessity with the Maryland Public Service Commission. So if it's a utility scale, they have to do that. They have to apply for such a, make such an application. Is that the concern you have, Bonnie? Is there anything here that you can sort of point to that you would say, what we should do now? I think I heard Jeff suggest that he didn't, maybe, I don't know if that was clarified enough for him, for your purposes, this 2-mile area, given what they said. Was that clear enough as you saw it?
I think I can live with what Harry's put before me relative to what Les has drafted here. I could live with it.
Bonnie?
So my suggestion is get rid of the security issues to landing pads section, and just indicate utility scale solar developers should consult with the Navy prior to when the developer applies for a certificate of public convenience. They've already provided that buffer that's available on the Smart DG of where they think that if your project falls within this zone. And that's just based off of a center point of the installation. It's not based off of a buffer of the airfield or the helicopter zone, because the same things apply to Webster. So it's not really genuine, the buffer that Pax River applied
So I think,
at the point of the installation. So,
so the concern I have, though, is that if we just eliminated that, that would mean all utility scale solar would have to go through this, would have to consult with the Navy.
It already does, right? Because all utility scale solar, assuming you adopt well, right now, without a solar task force, St. Mary's County Department of Land Use and Growth Management sent a utility scale project to the Navy as a member of the Technical Evaluation Committee. The Navy is a member of the Technical Evaluation Committee. Assuming the Solar Task Force recommends we keep that method of review of utility scale and the county commissioners adopt it, the Navy will always be one of the first agencies to see a utility scale proposal.
So let me make sure I understand you then. This is redundant as far as you see, right? This entire paragraph.
I think it's important to have a paragraph on this subject. I understand Bonnie's point, and I don't disagree with it, that if you were to strike the details that are in the, so first sentence of the second paragraph, security issues associated with foreign made, so on and so forth, glint and glare, I think we're being too detailed.
Yeah.
But it is important that the Solar Task Force recognizes that St. Mary's County as a whole has serious concerns about not interfering with mission critical on the federal installations.
yeah, and if they're already part of the technical evaluation, then they're going to see everything that comes through, and they'll raise the flag at that point in time of whether it's.
And so this is also true then, you would say, in some sense then, taking out the first sentence is your recommendation, Bonnie, of the second paragraph, and then just have utility scale solar developers should consult with the Navy prior to when the developer applies for a certificate of public convenience and necessity with the Maryland Public Service Commission.
Or we could basically say, we could point out that the military is already part of our process, but should be consulted prior to this to ensure that the process goes a little smoother. Incorporate it that way somehow. Because like we said, they're already part of the technical evaluation committee, but by the time you get to the tech evaluation committee, you've already done quite a bit of work, correct? So prior to that point, we would basically want to give anybody looking at this a heads up of, hey, by the way, you're going to need to, and if we wanted to put in a buffer, a couple of miles, but we don't need to get specific of what it is we're quote unquote protecting. We could say, then you should be prepared or should start conversations with the Navy ahead of time. That they are part of this process, and that this is something that they may have an impact on.
I'm good with that. I think what I would suggest is you provide language, right, to Les on this, right? And we come back to this. We're going to strike the first sentence, I think, and then let's provide some language here that the Navy is part of the Technical Evaluation Committee and therefore will be part of any evaluation of utility scale solar. The only thing I would say, it doesn't say when they have to have this, right? But I guess prior to applying for a certificate of public convenience, they would need to have site plans, et cetera, all drawn up, I think, correct? Right.
Yep.
So I think we can even eliminate that as well. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as far as the glare and solar installation, there is a possibility, for one thing, to have non-glare panels. There's also, I've seen some development, I don't think it's come to fruition yet, of a spray-on, and that's not a panel. That's we're kind of assuming everything's going to be panels here, I guess, kind of, when we write this up, so.
And even if they are panels, when Whitetail Solar proposed to be close to the Navy base, the Navy did not disapprove it. They decided Whitetail Solar was not a glint and glare issue. It wasn't until they found out that the materials were made by a foreign nation that they couldn't trust that they pulled the plug on it.
So that's in some ways to fellow task force members why I suggested that we put security issues there in there, because that is an issue that they specifically raised. And so this would, I think, signal to the not only to the commissioners but the development community that this is an issue for the Navy, and so they would, and in a sense, would need to know. It'd be good that they knew about this. So in some ways, the detail, I appreciate that some of the detail maybe shouldn't be in there, especially with the the glare issues, but. Something there that sort of gives them guidance, I think was my thinking on this. Mm-hmm. I'd be more than happy to, if you like, to remove the 2-mile zone. If that satisfies committee members, I'd be happy to do that. So we'll revisit this again.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Les?
I could offer a revised, I've been working here rewriting the second paragraph, and I could offer a revision here for your review.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So the new second paragraph would read, the Navy is currently part of the county's technical evaluation committee and will be part of the evaluation of any proposed utility scale solar project, period. However, developers should consult with the Navy as early as possible in the development process.
And then you could add, due to security issues associated with foreign-made solar installation equipment and pilot glare issues that could pose risks to military operations, period.
Did you hear that?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, because I do agree with you. Getting specific around what makes me nervous.
No,
but I do like that you bring up these are the two issues that have been identified by the Navy themselves. So yeah, and the zone piece, there should be some metric there. And that's what's difficult is when you look at the maps, it's very funky what they did on the Smart DG. So I can look at that a little bit closer and see if we can get some clarification from Sabrina.
And now that the
by the way, Sabrina is posted elsewhere for a time being, and that's why I couldn't reach her.
Oh, gotcha.
yeah, that's what's made her unavailable. Yeah,
Gotcha.
she's serving her country out of St. Mary's County.
Oh, did they actually backfill her position then?
No, no, it's my understanding that this is
a point of contact.
This is a temporary posting, and she'll be back.
Okay.
So, and also just for clarification, as we move forward, as Les said, the Chesapeake Conservancy did a great job accomplishing the task we assigned to them. We now, St. Mary's County, have control of the data, and we will work with the task force. Myself, Eric Benson of GIS, I'll re-engage him to arrive at our final maps now.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I think we do have less. I'm not going to ask for a vote on this right now because it is a little bit in motion here. But thank you for that. I think specification of that sentence. I think we're in agreement with that, Bonnie. If you would be in touch with Les on any further tweaks that you might have, Les, would you please work with Bonnie on this to finalize this sentence?
Absolutely. Okay, then the last recommendation besides number 3, go to number 12. And this is the incentives recommendation. taxation recommendation as well. And here it mimics, where as appropriate, what you did with community solar.
So I do have a comment, and we're going to have to speak obviously about number 3 as well. What to me would make sense here would be certainly that that any kind of pilot projects would go to either the preferred or optimal areas of the development. So there, I think it makes sense to sort of specify that it's the preferred and optimal areas on the site map, right?
I think that would be very logically consistent with where the task force, whatever language the task force will come up with number 3, I think using the optimal and preferred reference would work. And I will certainly reference that report. So if everybody's comfortable with that, eliminate brownfield, grayfield, or infill development. Instead, reference optimal and preferred categories as per the Chesapeake Conservancy report. And I'll fill in the specific language.
Any comments from task force members on that?
So what are we counting as optimal? When we say optimal, because this one, looking at the,
Well, optimals were rooftops and parking lots and degraded lands, were they not?
Yes, the fly spec map has the brown and tan. It doesn't show the rooftops on that map because they're too small a scale, but it has the parking lots and the degraded lands. But I don't believe it has all the county-owned properties. So if you want to also include that, they're included in the total land areas, but there's a separate map from my presentation including those.
And so moving forward, I would envision that we, as much as less appropriately said, we could reference these maps for now for discussion purposes. We would hope to have a final alternate version of the map because we can turn on those county-owned properties and add them to the fly spec.
Yeah.
so I guess the question is, what are we really saying is the difference between optimal and preferred?
Optimal generally was more already altered land, whether it was with a building or a parking lot or it has been degraded. And then the preferred land is minimal vegetation, lesser good soils, and at least 5 acres in size.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the preferred category really was, I think, where you would have utility scale ground mounted systems. It's not impossible you could have a project in an optimal area, but I think that's probably better for accessory use, some net metering, or community solar.
Yeah, that concept of creating utility scale with the use of rooftops and such may not be normal practice at the moment,
Right.
but should it come, we would be prepared for it.
So do we have that definition? I don't remember us having that definition of optimal or preferred in here yet, right?
It's not in our recommendations
correct.
because it was part of their report.
Gotcha.
And we haven't adopted it yet. So we will have to, as you, I think, rightly point out, we will have to define that in here so that it's very clear for the commissioners what we're talking about.
So the actual exhibit of who qualifies for a pilot has not been crystallized, but the concept that's on the floor right now, in essence, is to agree that in order to enjoy a pilot on a utility scale, you have to be on a
Correct. That is correct.
A preferred location. Yeah.
Or optimal location.
Yeah.
Okay, so that'll just be identified, in our appendix or whatever to this. Okay,
Is that clear, Bonnie? Clear, well, as clear as it can be right now, understood.
yeah.
So that really brings us back to 3, which is really the issue of how to deal, and I think this goes to what you're really discussing now, Bonnie, how to really incorporate the Chesapeake Conservancy map into some of this. And I think, as you sort of pointed out, Mr. Knight, that it's really the fly spec map, so to speak, right, which are the preferred and optimal areas. But up until now of what we've been saying, we've allowed it for much greater latitude, is my understanding, on where both community solar could go, right, although it's under 2 megawatts, right, and it might go in some of these areas that were potentially what you've referred to as no-go areas. Moreover, it's my understanding that even in some of these areas where I think there are farms with, I think, good soils, we did not exclude that. These could be developed, and we did discuss it. And I understood then when we had the farm, we had, I think, a Farm Bureau member here several months ago. We asked, would this prohibit people in these areas from developing their land, right, for solar? And at the time, they said they did not sign away those rights.
For accessory solar. So a person who's under the ag easement can develop solar for use by their farm.
So it is just accessory solar and, right.
Those people who have an easement, they've entered into the agricultural preservation easement, they can put up as much solar as necessary to serve their farm, and they can also enjoy, if I'm using the right term, net metering, that if they have an excess, it's not like it stops at the meter. Any excess they generate can go to the grid.
They can, and they also can avail themselves to aggregate net metering to essentially waterfall any excess generated through multiple meters that they may have there.
Yeah. So we're not trying to regulate those users.
Right, and it's not, so all these homeowners would still be able to get the benefits of solar energy. And even if they're in these areas that we've called no-go areas.
It doesn't
I think
apply to
it's
them.
unfortunate. That's right.
It doesn't apply to, it's just utility scale.
Yeah. So let's go back. Could we go back to the other map, which is not the fly spec map, but the map of what you've said is available and not available, so a go or no go. Let's.
Yeah, if we were to look at like this.
Yeah, this one. That's right.
Yeah.
So in this area, notice there's all these areas in white that you see here, right? Mm-hmm. All these could be developed into, right? There's homeowners there. This could be some very good farmland, right? And potentially, right? Of course, there could be. It's forested. Some of it's forested.
Right.
Some of this could be potentially used, right, for utility scale solar because it's in private hands, right? And these property owners might very much want to have solar energy on their farm. Is that your understanding of this map? Is that correct also, Susan? That map doesn't, you're not analyzing the whites, so to speak.
We did analyze the white in terms of what solar opportunity area exists on those parcels. So it's just the preferred ground mounted are the ones that came out the highest ranking. So we scored all of those properties.
And they scored
If
low.
they were, yeah.
They scored low, but they did not score no.
That's correct.
And
They scored low because they applied the prime and the canopy
Correct.
metric to each of the individual parcels.
correct. So the white, for clarification, the white is not rural legacy, not targeted ecological area. Obviously, we will eliminate the Webster Field and Naval Air Station. the local airport, it's not preserved and protected lands, and it's not critical area. Gosh, as I get closer, I think I actually do see Webster Field on this map as a black cross.
Yeah, it's all critical area too.
Yeah. But certainly when we refine our map, we will turn all state and federal lands black because we have no jurisdiction over those lands.
Yeah.
So conceptually, all that which is not colored is open for utility scale possibility, and then it would be up to the developer to decide, is it too far from the transmission lines to be practical? Can I afford to pay the forest conserve fees in lieu to clear cut what is necessary? Do I have steep slopes? Do I have highly erodible soils? Do I have FIDS habitat? I mean, there could be a great many things that complicate it, but we have not come up with criteria in advance to say it can't go there.
That's correct.
Now, I could turn all those layers on. I could turn on highly erodible
Correct.
soils. I could turn on steep slopes.
Just so I want to be real clear about this, what we have in front of us.
Yeah.
We have really two maps, right, that we're talking about. This map, which doesn't rule out, right, these are what you call the no-go areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it includes something other than preferred and optimal
Correct.
siting.
Right.
Correct.
And so notice even here, right, given especially with the targeted ecological area, that does rule out a great deal of land within St. Mary's County. And I appreciate that we want to do that because I know we do need to balance both the concerns of landowners and the county, the farmers, as well as solar developers. There's a lot of interest here, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe a question that I had for either Les or Jeff was, in these targeted ecological areas, if, for example, a developer found some land in there and found, say, 50 acres and wanted to put up a utility scale solar, and they got to the PSC or prior to that, would they? Do you have any thoughts on whether or not we've had one example where that was it turned out to be a very significant problem and it was for the developer? Do you have any thoughts on that, given your experience on the projects that get reviewed?
Yeah, one of the things that does occur and will occur, I think, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, in legislation, is that the counties are invited to participate within the CPCN process. So at that point in time, the county can draft letters and statements to those facts that here we have this map, we know this area is sensitive, it's an ecological area, and here's our reason for opposition to said solar project.
And this targeted ecological area is a state designated area, correct?
Yes.
No.
That is correct. And in addition to the counties or municipality, whatever the affected local jurisdiction is, participating in the CPCN process if they want, both the Maryland Department of the Environment and the Department of Natural Resources also conduct their own studies, reviews, and can recommend approval or denial or have a license be subject to certain conditions based on whatever type of environmental issues are at hand. And in some instances where separate permits are needed through these departments, they could outright deny the use of the permit and thus essentially kill the project no matter what the PSC says.
And then thank you very much. And then one final point of clarification. In these white areas, could these be forested lands that have parcels with greater than 50% forest on them? Do we know that?
Yeah, that could be one of the reasons the parcels have a low score, because there can be forest that's outside the targeted ecological areas, and there likely is. So,
And I think looking at this aerial photo version, I think it confirms that there's a lot of green there, and the darker green tends to be forest.
yeah. The tree canopy data set, or it would be an option to use Chesapeake Conservancy's tree canopy data set or the overall land cover, land use data
Yeah.
as a criteria. And just want to mention, we use the 2013-2014 data for this analysis. It was released in 2016, but it was developed from aerial photography based on 2013-2014. We have new data that's coming out this year, which represents 2017-2018 timeframe, and there's a caveat to that in the report. It's possible that there actually has been some forest cleared since then. Like I mentioned, there are sometimes cases where there's a development project that stalled or was canceled, and forest has already been cleared, and then that land gets developed for solar or some other purpose. So you have the option of using the tree canopy data as a screening layer in those white areas that are neither go or no-go.
So I guess one of it's not a big concern, but or a big issue or whatever, but trees grow if you don't farm your land. Okay.
Right.
And we know that back in, the 80s or whenever they started out with the clearing restrictions and everything, that a lot of people went out and cleared the land because they were going to develop it in 12 years.
Right.
You don't want incentives that keep people from letting trees grow.
Right.
It's a balancing act, but
Yes. I think it's probably outside my expertise to talk about that, but I also imagine that forests could be zoned in different classes, like if it's a managed forest, like intended to be a woodland or a timber tract on the farm, that might be considered differently from, remaining older growth forest that might be more like the raw natural state.
because typically, it's my understanding that far less than 10% of the wooded area in St. Mary's County is managed as forest land.
Yes.
It's there.
Yes.
I mean, people use it, but it's not managed.
Yeah, and I would also say, I think that would be an unintended consequence of the Forest Conservation Act if people are reluctant to let forests grow back on unused farmland because of a concern,
But these are private, many of these are privately owned land here
Right.
in this white that have greater than 50% tree cover. And in that case, I'll just express my concern about cutting trees down in order to either attract a developer or to actually develop. So that said, I think there's really two issues in terms of I think the task force is these two maps. There's a unfortunately named fly speck map and this Appendix A map, which has a great level pink on it. I'd like each task force member to weigh in on these maps and give me your thoughts on how we should proceed, because on the one hand, to use the Goldilocks principle, one seems somewhat draconian and a little bit too much, right? It looks as if we're prohibiting solar development in many places, although I still note there's over 3,000 acres, right, of I think you identified of ground-mounted solar, right, possibilities. So that's still a significant amount, but pictures do speak loudly sometimes. Whereas this map, right, does show greater possibilities for development, yet much of that is forested. So with that, I'll go back. Why don't we, I'll start with you, Jeff, and then we'll go down the line here.
Sure. It's going to be a delicate balancing act, and I hate to be overly prescriptive in what we're trying to do here. So I would probably try and shy away from a map altogether and just use some language on how we talk and describe, like we've kind of done here, as categorized as optimal or preferred. and then not really push or draw to an exact map as an appendice or anything like that. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, yes. I mean, it would be a more impressionistic, I think, and maybe that's what you're suggesting, right? And just keep, that would allow, I think, be open for greater amounts of development, but still sort of suggest that there are preferred and optimal sites, but maybe not show them all. I'm not sure how that would work.
Okay.
All right?
I'll keep thinking.
All right.
Yeah.
There was we, in the written report, we talk about some processes that other states have adopted. These are with respect to community pilot programs. And just for example, New Jersey had criteria where they basically would give proposals a series of points based on different criteria. So being open to LMI subscribers or a greater portion of LMI subscribers, or
Susan,
being on preferred
I'm
site.
sorry to interrupt. Our meeting's over at 6,
Okay,
and the
correct.
chairman had given the floor to the members.
okay,
I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
no worries.
So it's Mr. Thompson?
I don't have any.
So I think the idea that, and this was the big idea, I believe, behind the task force, was our idea was to provide to people a way to an easier yes, right? As far as development's concerned in this county, we really can't say no, blanket no, outside of some very, very narrow chunks of land, right? I mean, in the big scheme of things, there's always exemptions, there's always changes, there's always outside of a few very narrow things. So I think the idea behind the maps was we were trying to get direct development to our yes. So that's why we have the optimal and we have the preferred. And then this other map, we can come up with some other term of highly encouraged or acceptable. Because as we all know, just because it's in rural legacy or just because it's in targeted ecological areas, if somebody wants to go through the hoops, they can go through the hoops and they may or may not be successful, especially since we know the PSC can override just about anything. So I think the whole idea behind the maps and behind this analysis was we were trying to get to an easy yes and direct development to where we thought this was going to be ideal. So that's kind of my thought of, I think we should keep the maps. I think there's additional analysis and discussion that we as a group need to have with our localized knowledge of we need to take this out, or we need to reassess the boundaries of this, or let's have a greater discussion about this particular metric that was used. And then that will help us determine, kind of our categories of the maps that we want to have tied into our actual recommendations. So that's
I think that's fair, very fair, and I think you're right. We do need to discuss this, and I'm sorry, some more, partly because we've run out of time, but partially because, of course, we have to. And I do think, I agree with you, I do think the maps could be useful. I also think, you're exactly right. We were trying to provide a guide to where development could take place or should take place. And we didn't want to be too prescriptive about, saying exactly where. I understand that, with perhaps the exception, right, of our concerns about the vase. So in that sense, I think we do need to talk about this more, get a little bit closer to an understanding of where solar, utility scale solar, we might consider either it not being developed, right, and be prescriptive about no, it cannot go there, or whether we want to make that more flexible. So I think we still have some more ways to go here, but I appreciate everything that people have said here. I think this has been a very useful discussion. We got a little bit further today. I think we still have to go through this. So just to go back, I don't think we've really come down to really on number 3, any kind of decision on that yet. I think, Mr. Knight, it'd be helpful if we can kind of go through these maps a bit together, either, however, we can do that, within the rules of the meeting, either individually with you or, or with Les, so that we get a better understanding of this and a feel for how, what is being included, and maybe what's being excluded. Maybe my concerns about the pink map are not really well-founded because of, lots of trees there, which I think a lot of members would not want these trees cut down to have solar. So-
Right. Les and I can certainly meet with individual members. I can use my GIS tools that I have at my desk. We could do a team meeting.
I think that would be really welcome so that every member feels comfortable of the task force, knowing what we're recommending and what we're thinking about.
I also want to mention, since we are running short, we currently only have 2 meetings scheduled, May and June.
Yes.
And the report is due
Yes.
in June. So in essence, any final, decisions
Understood.
have to happen June. But should you think it appropriate, we can call a special meeting. Under the Open Meetings Act, we need at least 48 hours notice to the public. And so, because we only have 2 months left, if the task force deems it appropriate, we can call a special
Thank
meeting
you.
or two.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm very open to that. Thank you for mentioning it. Nonetheless, I think it would be, I guess we would all benefit by greater understanding of these maps, correct? And so I think we would all welcome maybe some assistance with them and walk through them so that we all feel like we really fully understand what we're recommending ultimately to the commissioners and to the citizens of St. Mary's County. And with that, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank
Very
you
much
for including
appreciated.
me.